Good afternoon. The survivors. It's like one of those May balls where the surviving numbers go down. We're at the penultimate session talking about cyber risks. And what a great panel we've got. None of us are insurance people, just to be clear, but we are guardians, like these two rather fine statues at the back of the hall. I don't know how many of you have taken note of these, Magog and Gog, the guardians of the City of London. These are the new guardians of the City of London, and I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to try and cover 4 topics in the 45 minutes we've been given. We'll talk a little bit first about the threat. We'll then talk a little bit about the defensive side. Thirdly, we will talk about what happens when you have an incident and what should happen. And then finally, we'll come to the inevitable topic of mythos and AI and the impact of that upon the cyber threat and cyber defense. So let me start, if I may, talking a little bit about the threat. I was a CISO for sort of a number of years in investment banking. I cannot remember a year where the reporting wasn't, the threats got worse. Talk through, particularly let's start with the governmental side, where the threat is, what are the trends, what do you worry about? Thanks, Nathaniel.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for everyone for having me. I think, so ex-government also, US government, CISA, Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. And so from my perspective, from the government side, it's adopting the AI side and incorporating that into your defensive operations, understanding that threat actors are also doing that from the offensive side. And so thinking about that, what we see sort of the last year and 18 months is identity still is the #1 problem. And what I mean by that is, so for example, your son who works in an organization might have 40 to 50 different digital identities, all tracked back to a single user. SharePoint is Workday, whatever that is, right? And that continues to be the biggest problem, regardless if it's SaaS or cloud or email. Those are the #1 challenges, I think, is identity. So it depends on how you exploit that and take advantage of that. And when you think about AI, non-human identities, how that's being, misused in a way.
So from a governmental side, cyber is part of the threat for pretty much every government now.
Yes.
But for most companies, I think it's probably the criminal threat that they worry about more.
Yes.
What trends are you seeing in that criminal threat side?
About every quarter, I get to go down to the dark web and look at what's going on and how the industrialization of ransomware and what that means. And so it's interesting just looking at it last quarter, seeing sort of some of these ransomware groups develop business plans, much like my own company, Darktrace. They have business plans, forecast planning, who they're going to target, why, how. And I'll give you an example. In the US, for example, some ransomware actors will investigate and say, oh, they already know that every single business in the US registers in the state of Delaware for tax purposes. And so they can do a little bit of investigation, understand who works there, what they do, and then use that information, throw it into an LLM, and generate information about who works there, what they do, and then create and curate sort of specific spear phishing emails, go after that. If they can get in, pull information out, pull a data leak, then they can use that as extortion against those sort of companies, and then they'll even know that the state of Maine provides sort of tax relief in the event that you can write that off. And so they already know that, and they already know that the SEC you have to report within 72 hours. And so those ransomware groups know how they target and the geography really, really well.
But the ransomware groups used to be dominated by the Russian organized criminal ecosystems.
Yeah.
But we've now seen these new teenage groups coming onto the scene, and I think a lot of the UK attacks have been attributed to that loose grouping.
Yep.
What are they doing differently? How has that changed from how the Russian organized criminals have been acting? What's the trend in the types of attacks that you've been seeing? And maybe I could ask you, Nick, to comment on that afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I think, so you're referencing sort of lapses or scattered spider or shiny hunters, depending on the name, those change. I think, for me, it's exploitation of trust and native English fluency, right? If someone picks up the phone and you hear a little bit of an accent, your hair goes up. If you're speaking in a very Oxford or very posh accent such as yourself, automatically trust, right? And so there's an element of, so you keep getting a message from your,
Italian accent, so most trusted actually on the call center, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So exploiting that trust, taking advantage of sort of technology, bombing them into convincing, hey, you have that sort of trust, and say, okay, and then they'll call up the help desk and also sound very polite and professional and convince the IT devs to get a reset, and then they're in. So.
Anything to add to that, Nick?
Yes, but if you sort of step back and look at the motivations that we're seeing, so there's, of course, growing capabilities amongst that younger generation that you described. There's greater access to tools and technology that people can buy online to engage in ransomware type attacks. There are organized groups that are willing to sell their skills on, and so there is a kind of ability for those to scale up in terms of homegrown attacks. But I don't think we should also lose sight of the significant threat that we continue to face from Russia and from China and from other hostile state activity that will, in an increasingly kind of unstable global economic landscape, seek to find vulnerabilities in the UK economy, seek to exploit, as we saw last year with some of the big attacks on organisations like Jaguar Land Rover, the vulnerabilities and the impact at huge scale of disrupting supply chains in those companies that affect quite literally thousands of companies, tens of thousands of livelihoods that sit off the top of that. So that kind of hostile state activity seeking to disrupt and undermine, whether it's confidence, whether it's financial prosperity of the UK, we've got to be really alive to some of those, as well as some of the new generation of attacks we're seeing. But I think it's those things combined that are leading to us seeing, as you described at the beginning, yet another growing set of stats that say the threat is continuing to go up year on year.
I've been lucky enough to sit in pretty much all of the sessions today. Climate, geopolitical, supply chain, every session has said the threat's going up. So why is cyber different? Why should the people in this room looking at the insurance be thinking more about cyber or differently about cyber from a threat perspective than any of those other risks that they're having to manage? Any thoughts?
I think, just from my perspective, well, it's a lot easier just to pop open a laptop and use an IP address and sort of start from there. It's much difficult to ICBM or a tank or a nuclear missile, right? And so I think the level of access is just so much easier that you can just do it from, your home if you're 12 years old, right? So.
I think also my background, all I've done all my life is crisis communications of every sort of crisis. And working on cyber these last 10 years, people say, well, why is it different? Why should I care? Why should we put all this effort behind it? And the reason it differs, and it makes it really difficult to mitigate and manage from a kind of corporate point of view, is that you have a threat actor in your system looking to do you harm. That is different to an explosion, a fire, a terrorist incident where it's a contained kind of event. You have somebody in your system looking to do you continuous harm day in, day out until you get a grip of that situation. And so it changes on the hour. So you have a crisis management team who are being told one thing, and then, anybody, a forensics provider or whatever, will say, oh, and they're here, or they've done this, and we need to do this, or the threat actor will call the CEO, or in some cases, call the Sun, call a customer, brief the media. It is a changing landscape, hour by hour, on something that you are just not in control of. And whichever organisation or person, they are in your system looking to do you harm.
Yeah. So,
I fear of repeating myself, but I think it just comes back to the devastating impact that cyber attack can have. If you're shut out of your systems, if your data is stolen and exploited, if your supply chain collapses, or if you're part of a supply chain that collapses, it may not necessarily be that the cyber event, the cyber attack affects you from a cyber perspective, but it can have a devastating impact on your organization. And I think it's recognizing the scale of that. It's why at national level it's recommended that where organizations are big enough to have boards, that cybersecurity is a board level focus. And it's why we're working, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more, I suspect, but why we need to work right throughout the system to make sure that all of the small companies that make up supply chains are equally thinking about this. And it's not just something that happens to big business. And so for me, no matter where you sit in the business chain, it's recognizing the devastating impact that cyber can have in a way that you may not have recognized previously. And unless people engage in the discussions and listening and understanding, they won't necessarily recognize a risk until it's too late.
Okay, I'm going to come back and I'm going to build on that because I think we're pivoting now from talking about the threat, clearly on an upwards scale, exponentially, you could argue, to defense. So where we are, I would say, first of all, we have built IT stacks which are incredibly fragile, both systemically and for most enterprises. We prioritize speed, low cost, convenience over security and over resilience. And so our starting point is not a great one. And then you look at something like the National Cybersecurity Centre's Cyber Essentials scheme, which is, in my view, a kind of B minus grade of cybersecurity. Less than 1% of UK companies have got that accreditation, even though they are told by the National Cybersecurity Centre, which I know some people in the insurance industry would dispute, that it reduces your risk by 92% if you have that accreditation. So I'd like to come back to you, Nick, and ask you, okay, what would you like to see financial institutions, insurance, but also that rest of the ecosystem, what do you think they definitely have to be doing to achieve that minimum cyber resilience and security?
First thing I'll say is I'm not a practitioner in this, but it comes back to the basics, doesn't it, as you alluded to, making sure in any organization that there is awareness, there's good cybersecurity hygiene, there's good control measures and software protection, and that where people are running tools and technology, that there's regular patching and updates of those technologies. And that's sort of essentially some of the fundamentals that sit within the Cyber Essentials framework. So making sure that stuff's happening is what we've got to do. And we can sit here and we can talk about it, and some people will walk away and go and research it and perhaps implement something they hadn't done before. But where I think other bits of the system, whether you are somebody who owns a significant supply chain or you're an insurer, mandating and encouraging with whatever tools you've got people to sign up to Cyber Essentials is the way in which we start to build and layer up and sort of lift up, I suppose, the minimum protective security standards across the country then.
Nathaniel, would you?
I think from my perspective, software bill of materials, SBOM, essentially, you treat it very much like a financial sort of space where you have a bill of materials and this is what we did. Where's your software bill of materials? How do you know what's in your network? If you just continuously do scanning, okay, but what else is in there? So I think incorporating that as part of sort of a very basic, requirement, even with AI now, right? If you're incorporating AI into that, you should also have what type of AI. Is it Claude or is it ChatGPT? It depends, right? So I think that's a big requirement to understand what's in your system.
Anything to add? I mean, both of those answers, I have to say, quite IT-centric answers.
Yes, it's a practitioner, sorry.
One of the biggest things organizations can do is have a plan and test it. Not just the IT response, not just what the legal team are doing, not working in silos, which you quite often see, oh, we've got our plan, but working as a proper exec team who know exactly what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, how they're going to be triggered in. Quite often things happen and it doesn't escalate in time because people don't know what those triggers are and where to go. And also really kind of understanding who you're going to call in. There's no point having a plan and kind of thinking, oh, are we going to negotiate or not? Even if it's for time and you've got no intention of paying a ransomware, we've been on cases where that's not in place and, you're giving people names and they're like 6-7 organizations down because everybody's so busy and they can't do it. You do not want to be in a position at your worst moment where you're trying to reach out for help and everybody's like, yep, we can't. So who are the external advisors? What are the critical decision-making things, whether you are going to negotiate, whether you would consider paying a ransom, why would you consider paying a ransom? Who would your external counsel be? Not just the people who usually advise you, but who are experts in data governance. The difference between when I'm called in and it's always on a Friday or Easter Sunday or Christmas Day, always, between a company who has got those plans in place and is ready to press go, not saying it's perfect because there's always kind of left field things come at you that need to happen, as opposed to people with no plan and you're on a call for 10 hours as they're kind of trying to, who's doing what, there's 50 people on the call rather than 8 people. It can be really, really difficult for them. So plan, prepare, roles, responsibilities, who's your number 2, how are you going to do it, how are you going to prepare for, it's not a day, it's not a week, it's months, it's the long haul. People really get taken by surprise at how long these things last for, and that initial week or 2 of 20-hour days. Always say in that kind of core team, somebody will be ill within the first week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my reflection after doing this for 10 years is that cybersecurity is no longer a conceptual challenge. We know what good looks like to get to that basic level. It's an execution program management challenge, which is not easy by any means, but that all depends on corporate security culture and the board and what you were saying about the ownership right from the top of the company. One of those multiple controls, mitigations against the risk, is insurance. So there's a room full of insurers. What role can the insurance industry play in trying to sort of drive things in the right direction? They can't, frankly, impact on the threat side of the equation, but they can perhaps have a role in terms of driving a different sort of prioritization within their clients. I mean, Nick, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly simple in terms of how potentially insurers can assist by whether it's mandating or incentivizing through premium levels, organizations to make sure that they are carrying out some of those basics and they've got things in place. I think as we've taken steps in the UK as well around things like cyber sanctions and creating statute that essentially discourages people from paying ransoms to sanctioned entities, and placing the requirements on the person that's going to do the paying to check with the FCDO whether or not an entity, particularly if it's a hostile state, is on a sanction list. There are layers of things there that in terms of the ways in which insurers can help to ensure people are engaging in healthy practice. And again, whether that's through increasing or decreasing premiums, however you look at it, to get some of that action, or indeed just mandating that you have to have done certain elements of training, signed up to behave in certain ways, including reporting at the earliest opportunity into the authorities, so that we can then trigger some of that support and advice and getting people access to the types of services that they can bring in externally to help them in those moments. I think there's lots of things there that can go into that bucket, and insurers are one of many elements, but certainly one element that's got an opportunity to encourage good behaviours in that space.
I mean, Nicola and I were both at the Munich Cybersecurity Conference earlier in the year, and I'd hosted a lunch for Sean Carecross, President Trump's cyber advisor, where somebody on the UK side essentially said what you just said about, okay, we're having this new cyber legislation coming in, and we want to have mandatory reporting, and we want to ban ransomware payments. And he almost fell off his chair. He was appalled at the idea that the government would instruct that. And one of the arguments, one of the more convincing arguments, was that it would simply drive, particularly if done in isolation just by the UK, it would drive this all underground. There would be less reporting, people would circumvent it. Nicola, you've probably got more experience than any of us in incidents. How much is under-reporting a challenge, which is to say that there's quite a lot of companies that will decide that actually for them, for either ethical reasons or shareholder reasons, or for financial reasons, the best thing to do is to pay a ransom, and that they make that decision. I'll ask you, and then maybe I can come to you afterward, Nathaniel, but in terms of your experience of what you are observing without necessarily passing judgment on it.
Well, having worked for UK government for 15 years and latterly at the NCSC for 7 years, it never leaves you. Reporting, I think, and sharing in terms of cyber incidents is really, really critical, and the more we can do, the better it will be. I mean, the NCSC has all its trust groups and stuff, but when you're working with organisations and it's not public and the lawyers are saying, okay, who are we reporting it to first, the ICO or FCA, and let's manage it, let's find out more and stuff. There is a huge amount of nervousness about expanding that number of people who know. And I think the only way around that is for organisations to feel that they can share, even if it's post the event. So, for instance, the CEO of Colt was on the stage of the NCSC conference just the other month talking about what it felt to have a major ransomware incident. That is really, really rare, even in closed circles. So I think the more, whether it's different organisations, the insurance, NCSC, the police, convene CEOs, GCs, even in private, to talk about the experiences that they've had. And without a doubt, there'll be many, many more people who you've never heard of who have gone through it, who actually would probably be much more open to sharing it and talking about it. But I think that reporting and is really, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, we've seen it in the US with new regulations, right? If you're in critical national infrastructure, and it's driven a lot more reporting. I mean, I'm in favour, but it is a terrifying moment when it happens to an organisation.
Let me take a very specific thing that you said there and put it to Nick. I'll come back to you in a second, but just on a very specific issue. Who do you report to? If you're an enterprise in the UK, do you report to City of London Police, the Met Police, the NCSC, the NCA? Who is it that should be the recipient of that first contact?
The starting point for report is report fraud. So that's the new national reporting centre for all fraud and cybercrime, and that will trigger the onward referrals into those other bits of the system that you've just listed to make sure that from a national crime agency, national cybercrime unit, that the tasking and triage function that sits there receives that information in a really timely way, is able to assess it and work out what support and interventions needed, both from a kind of protective, security, prevention, recovery point of view, but also where there are lines of investigation that need to be tasked, that they can be tasked out. If it's a particular ransomware strand or particular organised crime group that's already come to national notice, there will be somewhere in the UK a law enforcement, a bit of the law enforcement system who is tasked with looking at that ransomware strain and developing the operational policing and law enforcement response to that. But only by coming in and making that central report do you get access to the insights and the intelligence. Are you able to help build the insights and understanding about how your organisation's been attacked that can then help NCSC and policing disseminate information out to other organisations to say, here's the latest type of attack, this is how it's being perpetrated, these are things you need to do to protect yourself. So there is recognising there is absolutely an organisational, existential threat, reputational risk, financial risk issue, but without everybody taking responsibility, as Nicola said, for reporting, we cannot all move together in the sort of safest way possible. And so, I completely agree. Reporting at the earliest possible stages is absolutely essential to help us, to help you.
Okay. Anything to add to any of that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the U.S. perspective, it's interesting in terms of reporting because it's changed over time. Originally, it was sort of voluntary, and then it became really challenging for legal liability, and so there was some legislation that passed to sort of remove that. So you share information, you share basic incidents, and you get a little bit of better understanding of what's happening in the threat landscape. And so now it's changed into mandated reporting to try and sort of evaluate what's happening. It's interesting from the insurance side of how that's also changed in terms of better investment into organizations, offering those plans, but also how threat actors are sort of manipulating that. One of the first things they try and do, once they get into the environment, they'll try and find where the insurance document is and pull and extract that out. And then use that, read the documentation, understand the premium, and then say, oh, your premium's $400,000. I'll pay you $300,000, make it a deal, and then you can get it covered.
Yeah.
And that's how they're sort of, then you don't have to underreport it to legal, you can just do it to insurance. On the flip side, insurance companies are seeing this and investing into cyber practitioners. So we offer these insurance plans out to these customers, the C&I, but we have our own incident response teams to keep costs down, or we keep making money on. Because every business needs to.
So let me talk more broadly about what happens the hours, the minutes, the hours, the days, and the months afterwards, Nicola. What do you see as the big mistakes that get made? And what do you see perhaps as best practice? But let's start with the things that, if you are a victim, once you've called action fraud and said, we've got an issue, what are the things that you should be avoiding doing in that immediate period and then maybe longer?
So anybody dealing with a crisis, normally you're kind of trained, as it were, to get out ahead of it, control the narrative, go out early. You almost have to flip that on its head with a cyber incident, particularly if it's a cyber incident that is that the world doesn't know about. So the impact isn't visible. If the impact is visible, we talked about M&S or JLR, from a communications perspective, it's quite easy. You have to go out. This is what's happened, this is the impact, this is what we're doing about it. It's not comfortable, and it creates a huge amount of pressure from different stakeholders, and you're not ready for it. But in terms of a pinch point about what to do, you don't have a choice. If you have ransomware where they say we've got X of data, one of the biggest issues is that rush to go out and kind of tell the world, oh my gosh, we're sitting on this major problem, we have to go out and tell everybody. Cyber incident, data's taken, and you see it, and people just tell everybody, data's taken, we don't know, and you ask simple questions, well, what data? Who's impacted? How many people? What are you going to say to them? Don't know. And it's so you're going to go out to millions of people and say this. Even from a regulatory point of view, regulators don't like that either, because you're absolutely creating panic amongst people needlessly. So then you're kind of okay, so how do we plan for when we go out to the ICO first, if there is data, what's the holding line, how are we going to do the investigation? And so one of the biggest mistakes is that people go out really quickly. Okay, there's been an incident. It's fine, no data's been taken, or it's fine, non-sensitive data, it's nothing. It's fine, no financial data, you're all fine. And then, a few days later, actually, maybe a bit of financial data, but don't worry, we've got it. Actually, all the financial data, but it's still fine, don't worry. And so this is the biggest mistake, but it's the hardest thing, because as a company, particularly where they have a brand to protect and it's a trust thing, you often have that CEO going, we have to tell people, we cannot sit on this.
Yeah.
But it's think sequence. Who are you telling first? You've got to tell your regulators, you've got to tell your shareholders, what is it you're saying? And try and get everything in place so that when you do go out, you're going out with a reassuring message. This is what we think, this is the impact, this is what we're doing. So that's the biggest one.
And of course, one of the other people you would be talking to very early on would be your insurers, who I think can also play a role. It's not just about, if you like, the financial, displacing the financial overview, but actually because they have oftentimes been through lots of incidents, like you, can play a sort of choreography role, pulling in others. Is that part of the sell from the insurance, that ability? Some legal firms do the same thing, to act as the orchestrator because the victim probably hasn't been through this multiple times before, isn't quite sure who in government or the police to call, who on the regulatory side, who on the forensic help side, who on the communication side. Is that a role that you see the insurance industry playing?
Yes, and many insurers will have a panel, and these are the kind of, whether it's forensics, comms, etc. But I go back to my first point. As an organisation, whether you have insurance or not, right, you need to know who those external providers are. You need to have a relationship with them. You know, if I go in, I would far rather go in, I've at least met the people, I know the playbook, I know the tone. Same with forensics, same with the legal people. But if you get the right external advisors, that is actually all you've done for 15 years. Okay, here's who you call at the NCSC or the fraud line. Here's how we're going to manage the media. Here's the journalists we're really worried about calling because of their thing. That is what you're calling experts in. Your head of comms, your head of legal. They've never done this before. Why should they know? That's why you need it. But yeah, that's what insurers do.
And Nick, when you've been dealing with victims in this sort of incident, what reflect upon that for us? Share what you think it would be helpful for people to know.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. Getting to the point of being able to do that well is early investment. It's testing and exercising. It's bringing all of those people together around the table. So it's individually, whether you work in comms or legal or data management or whatever the operational function of an organisation, it's looking at a role and working out what is it you're going to be able to bring, where are the risks for you and your function, and in advance doing some work to prepare yourself for that, and then coming together to run a number of tests and exercises. And there are organisations that will do that. Policing through our National Protect networks, as you alluded to, through the Cyber Resilience Centre network, offers some of these free services to come out and help organisations, particularly smaller organisations, work through some of those hypothetical situations. And I think it's only by doing some of that you build up the confidence and the right culture in the moment. And one of the things I heard, we invited the CISO from Co-op to speak to one of our National Policing Network meetings a little while ago. And I was really struck by some comments that he made about the culture that he set in the sort of incident response room and meetings. And from the outset said, this is going to be tough. These are going to be really long days. We're going to get some stuff wrong. But I believe in you, and I know you can do this, and we're going to pull out the stops and do it. And he set an absolutely wonderful tone that enabled people to work really collaboratively, not being fearful about bringing more and more bad news, as you alluded to, this sort of, you've just uncovered something else bad, and you don't want to share it because you've got the culture wrong right from the outset. And I think the more organisations have thought about this, have planned for it, have thought about the roles, have got a plan to bring in the help, but recognise really importantly that only by taking your time working through the stages of first understanding what you've got, understanding the extent to which that attack has happened, making sure it's contained, then looking at all of the consequence management that you've got to do around the way in which that data could be used, the people that you've got to notify, the sort of secondary victims, as well as all the regulators, and then thinking about once you've got all of that picture, how you can communicate out. It's those structures and the practice of doing that that means in the heat of battle, when you're under real stress, you can calmly make some really good decisions that help your organisation as easily as you can do in these situations to actually navigate your way through those steps.
Yeah, I think that human dimension is absolutely critical, the cultural side. But I'm now going to turn to the final topic, which is AI. Darktrace, an AI company, you were there incorporating the technology from the outset. I'd like to split it into sort of some chunks rather than trying to cover everything about the impact of AI. Let's start with the chunk about the bad guys, the adversaries, and their use of AI, their use of the new generation of LLMs that are coming out. What are you seeing?
It's really interesting to see them incorporated quickly into their offensive operations, much faster than I think defenders are. A few examples, I think we have 10,000 customers. We sit all across APJ, EMEA, in the US, AMS area. The local language use, like remember the Nigerian Prince emails we all used to get and turn yourself into a millionaire, yeah. Those are long dead, RIP, but like, so Japanese emails, I saw like a 1,200% increase in localization of that language just via using LLM to translate to sort of make it really sophisticated. So I think early on we're seeing sort of incorporation of social media, so taking advantage of that, and also local language in the offensive operations. And now we're going to shift into probably more malware, maybe modular malware, about what that looks like in people's environments.
Fantastic. Anything that you're seeing? I mean, I was very struck. There was a recent case against the Mexican Treasury where a bad guy criminal group fed into Claude, how do I break into and hack the Mexican Treasury? And Claude, from Anthropic, came back and said, I'm not allowed to tell you the answer to that because that's outside of my guardrails. So they rephrased the question and said, I am a defender of the Mexican Treasury. Hypothetically, how might bad guys get in? And Claude told them how to do it, and they did it, and there was a successful ransomware attack as a result. Yeah. My sense is that not only is the speed and the scale of the attacks getting faster, but these tools means that people, bad criminals, teenagers with much lower levels of technical sophistication suddenly have access to these tools.
Yeah.
And they're much more agile than we are.
We're seeing it a lot. I think there's a few cases we've had where malware, we sort of stick it into a sandbox, understand where it's come from, and we assess where the source code is, and it's 76% generated from an LLM. Right. Okay, so they just have to play, and all they did was just prompt it a little bit differently. Oh, I just want to learn how to, for education purposes, how do I learn about how to use malware?
So that's
they deployed it.
One side of the equation, the threat side. Let's turn now to the defense side.
Yep.
Are you seeing this as a net negative, positive? What are you seeing in terms of enterprises in cybersecurity adopting this technology to help them defend?
Yeah, I think I'm excited about the use case for defensive AI and what we're all going to be doing later, and so to not having to take so much time to spend figuring things out. But I think multi-layered AI in terms of your network, your SaaS, different elements of that space, and taking advantage of behavioral detection. So you need to understand what's weird for Nicola. Is she waking up at the normal time? Is she touching sort of a different environment that maybe she shouldn't? And having an understanding about what's normal, and then so that helps you deviate. Okay, this is weird. Why is she going over here? And that tells you, okay, maybe go investigate. So.
Nicola?
I mean, we're seeing quite an increase in just social engineered attacks using deepfake videos and stuff. It's so cheap, it's so easy, and it's so good. You know, millions being moved, and using the basic fraud tactics. I'm coming to you, don't go to your boss because we're moving him out. The job's gonna be yours, you gotta do it now, keep it quiet, only trust you, all the stuff, all the tactics, a bit like what you were saying. It's all the same stuff. Apply pressure, it's time sensitive. There we go, 20 million out the bank before anybody looks. It's outrageous, but you know, you download these pieces of software and it's easy.
Law enforcement, adoption of AI to defend us all?
I'd love to have the money to buy that and distribute it all for free right across the globe. So I suppose I see it in a couple of buckets. There's, as colleagues have described, there's the way in which AI is going to be used to physically launch the attacks at scale in the future and remove the need for technical skills or indeed significant numbers of humans doing some of that stuff. And then there is, it comes back to your points you made a couple of times about the kind of human in the loop, and we always forget the people here. It's the people are the greatest vulnerability in terms of information and data and IT security in organizations. And AI, as has been described, will help criminals to look much more authentic and to engage people in doing things that don't look out of the ordinary, to whatever kind of tools and technology we've got sat on our systems, monitoring for exceptional behaviours and activity. And that's where I am optimistic, but I'm also nervous that we are then heavily reliant on AI to become increasingly sophisticated to spot more nuances in behavioural differences that perhaps traditional security mechanisms built onto IT platforms weren't able and didn't need to spot. And it's going to be an AI race against AI in how we stay one step ahead of the curve with that. So some huge opportunities through AI, but also some huge risks and challenges for us coming down the line, I think.
But that balance, I think, is critical. I listened to the AI panel this morning up on the stage, which I thought, if I'm honest, lacked boldness, because this seems to me to be an area where you cannot move at the pace we need to be moving, which includes having a human in the loop or on the loop. I mean, I know Darktrace now, it's like machine speed, the attacks, and the response has to be machine speed as well. And the biggest risk we have is that our concern, both as a nation or as an enterprise, about having all of the guardrails in place, simply can't work because of the speed at which this is all moving forward. We have 2 minutes. It's gone from green to amber. We'll go red in a second. But I will give you each an opportunity for a 30-second final comment, if you have one. What message would you like to share with this esteemed audience? Nick.
Goodness, I thought your eyes boring at me. I mean, for fear of repeating myself, it's for people to have trust in the national agencies that are there to help and support, not to fear reporting. A lot of that can be done confidentially, as was described. If an incident snowballs, it will become public knowledge anyway, and then you're behind the curve. So reach out early, get the help and support, but most importantly, make sure that you're doing the things to put the preventative measures in place now, and you're testing and exercising and getting your people ready for an attack, because it will happen to you at some point.
30 seconds on the dot.
Nice, excellent. I think for me, it goes back to sort of behavioral understanding of your own enterprise, the user, the system, that space. And so that will allow you to sort of see that deviation and sort of understand, okay, now I need to go investigate, or this is normal, it's okay. And so I think having that relationship between the business and the security team will be paramount for me.
Very good. Nicola.
It's not a question of if, but when. Every organisation has got to put a plan in place, know who they're going to call, and really have thought through what your North Star is going to be if this happens. Because it's very, very different responses by companies, and you are judged by not the fact that you've had a cyber incident, but on how you deal with it. And the fact that the cyber incident sort of disappears after 2 or 3 days. It's then about your business resilience and how strong a business you are, not that you were attacked. So get that right, build in how you're going to build after it.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you to the 3 Ns, Nick, Nicola, Nathaniel. Could you join me in expressing appreciation?